Welcome to week 13, and today we're focusing on the communication aspect of policy analysis. So, up to now, we've talked a lot about how to conduct analyses, how to identify problems, evaluate options, and use evidence. But the truth is, even the most rigorous analysis has little impact if it's not communicated clearly and effectively. So, this week we'll discuss how to present analysis in ways that are accurate, fair, and persuasive to policymakers. And as always, our main objectives today are twofold. First, to become familiar with key communication strategies that policy analysts use to present their work, both written and oral forms. And second, to recognize and avoid some of the most common mistakes analysts make when communicating their findings. So think of today as the bridge between analysis and action, how we translate evidence into something decision makers can actually use. Let's start with 5 cross-cutting rules that should guide any written or oral communication of policy analysis. These come from Patents Wiki and Clark, and they're useful reminders for keeping your work clear and credible. So, of course, the rules here are simplicity, accuracy, documentation, fairness, and mechanics. So we'll go through each of these one by one, and you'll notice that they overlap somewhat because these are not separate boxes to check, but rather guiding principles that reinforce one another. So first up, simplicity. When you're writing a policy memo or presenting findings, always aim for clarity. So you'll want to use the active voice. For example, say the evidence supports expanding policy Y, not policy Y is supported by the evidence. Next, be specific and precise. You'll want to avoid vague qualifiers like very or somewhat because policymakers don't want to guess what you mean, they want to know exactly what your findings show. And finally, if your data aren't precise enough to answer a question, say so directly, because transparency builds credibility. Remember that simple doesn't always mean simplistic, it means clear and purposeful. Next up is accuracy, and accuracy is about finding um, or presenting your findings in a faithful way to your so that it's faithful to your evidence. That means verifying facts using multiple sources, double checking your calculations, and acknowledging any inconsistencies in your data. Remember here that the difference between accuracy and precision is that you can have precise results that are still inaccurate if they consistently miss the mark. Most importantly, don't go beyond what the data can actually support. It's tempting to overstate findings for a stronger narrative, but accuracy must always take priority over persuasion. Third, we have documentation, and this is about the foundation of a credible analysis. It means providing enough information so that others can replicate your work or verify your results. That might include your data sources, assumptions, and analytical methods. Transparency not only strengthens your argument, it shows professionalism and ethical integrity. So in short, documentation allows others to trust and build upon your work. Let's talk now about fairness. In good policy communication, fairness acknowledges multiple perspectives. You should report all main alternative views and explanations, even those that challenge your preferred recommendation. Citing the work of others and recognizing opposing evidence demonstrates objectivity, not weakness. Policymakers are more likely to trust your conclusions when they see you've engaged seriously with other viewpoints. Fairness is about intellectual honesty. It's what separates credible analysis from advocacy. Finally, let's not underestimate mechanics. This means attention to detail when it comes to spelling, punctuation, capitalization, formatting, etc. These may seem minor, but these small elements shape the reader's perception of your professionalism. Next, always be consistent with your citation style, whether it's APA, AMA, Chicago, etc., because a clean, well-formatted document signals that you are serious about your work. Poor mechanics can distract from your message, no matter how strong the content is. Let's move forward now from the communication principles to the process of writing up a policy analysis. Writing is not just a final step after analysis, it's a critical part of it. And the act of writing forces us to clarify logic, check assumptions, and strengthen our arguments. So treating writing as a tool for thinking, not just for reporting, is the best place to begin. You'll want to start with an outline because this helps you map out your argument, your evidence, and your recommendations before you start drafting paragraphs. A good outline is structured around key policy questions. Again, what's the problem? Why does it matter? And what are the options? Then, what's your recommendation and why? Begin drafting your findings early, even if some analysis is still in progress. Early writing helps identify where evidence is weak or where you're making leaps in logic. You can also work on different sections in parallel. For instance, developing your problem framing while refining cost estimates or stakeholder analysis. In real-world policy settings, teams often write in parallel to meet tight deadlines. A useful technique is writing backward. Start with your conclusions or recommendations, and then develop the reasoning and evidence to justify them. However, make sure that you're not making up evidence or a narrative just to meet those recommendations. This ensures that the report remains outcome-oriented and directly relevant to policymakers. And also remember, a policy analysis is not an academic essay, it's a decision tool. Your workflow should always be designed to make the information as actionable as possible. This table lays out the typical structure, followed by Patton, Sawicki, and Clark. The summary serves as a one-page executive overview. It should immediately orient the reader, who sometimes may not even read beyond this page if it's a busy policymaker. And it will also alert them to your analytical approach, your core message, and key recommendation. Think of this as your elevator pitch, but in written form. Next, the problem definition section defines what the issue is and why it matters. It must be precise. This is where you demonstrate your understanding of the public health relevance, scope, affected populations, and potential determinants. Next, you establish evaluation criteria, the values and measures that you will use to compare policy alternatives. Common criteria, of course, as we've mentioned in class, include effectiveness, efficiency, equity, feasibility, and political acceptability, and justify why each criterion is relevant in your specific context. The alternative section details the main policy options under consideration. These could include maintaining the status quo, adopting a new intervention, or revising existing policy instruments. In analysis and comparison, you apply your evaluation criteria systematically to assess such alternatives. This is where you integrate evidence, both quantitative and qualitative, and show the trade-offs between options. Your conclusion and recommendation section must then synthesize findings, present your preferred option, and explicitly address limitations and expected outcomes. Finally, next steps outline what comes after the recommendation, whether this is potential research, implementation considerations, or plans for monitoring and evaluation. It signals that the policy analysis is part of an ongoing cycle and not a static product. After producing a solid draft, the next step is feedback, and this is essential because you can never do policy analysis in isolation. Circulating drafts to colleagues, technical experts, or other stakeholders helps identify weaknesses, blind spots, and misinterpretations before they reach a decision maker. When seeking feedback, be clear about what you need. For example, you might request input on the logic and accuracy of your arguments. Does your reasoning follow, and are your conclusions justified by the data? Alternatively, you might ask for feedback on mechanics and presentation. Is your writing clear? Is it organized well? Is the tone also good? The goal is to ensure both substance and style meet the high standards expected in professional policy analysis. Constructive feedback can elevate a competent draft into a truly persuasive policy document. Once feedback has been gathered, move into a revision phase. This is not just about fixing grammar, although that's part of it. It's about improving the clarity, logic, and persuasiveness of your argument. Strengthen sections where the reasoning is weak or overly defensive. Reorganize material if the flow doesn't support your message. In some cases, this might mean reordering sections or reframing the policy definition altogether. The problem definition altogether. Also, you'll want to check for updates in evidence or data since the first draft, especially if you're writing over a relatively longer period of time. Policy environments evolve quickly, and analysis must reflect the most current conditions. Good policy writing is iterative. That means revision is analytical and communication is key along the entire process. At this stage of being ready to use, your analysis should be clear, concise, and self-contained. Someone unfamiliar with your work should be able to understand and apply your findings without further clarification. Remember that policy documents often circulate widely among agencies, media, and advocacy organizations. So, if appropriate, prepare a one-page summary or press brief that highlights the key message in plain language. This ensures accessibility while preserving analytical integrity. The final version should function as both a technical report and a communication tool. And of course, graphics play a critical role in communicating policy analysis. Visuals help reveal patterns of data, trends, distributions, relationships that might otherwise be buried in text or tables. They can also illustrate processes, options, and outcome probabilities, making complex issues more intuitive. Some common forms of graphics include curve diagrams, which show trends over time, pie charts, which are useful for composition or proportions, histograms for frequency distributions, organizational charts for mapping institutional relationships, and scatter plots for illustrating correlations. Effective visualization is not decorative, it's also analytical. Each figure should clarify finding and not merely embellish it. Next, tables are another essential communication tool, especially when precision and comparability matter. They allow you to order and summarize numerical data to support arguments and facilitate reference. They can also display purely numerical information or text summaries, or sometimes a mix of both, depending on your goal. A well-designed table makes it easy for readers to see key contrasts between policy options, time periods, or population groups. And a simple rule is that every table should answer a specific analytical question. If it doesn't, it probably doesn't belong in the report. Beyond charts and tables, visuals like photos and maps can enhance policy communication in powerful ways. Photos help document real-world conditions such as inadequate housing, food environments, or clinical settings, and can humanize data-driven analyses. Meanwhile, maps are invaluable for illustrating spatial variation, whether it's the distribution of disease burden, health resources, or environmental exposure. But visuals must always be purposeful and ethical. They should add understanding, not just emotion for its own sake, and they must never distort or sensationalize the evidence. Let's take a look now at a realistic framework for engaging policymakers. Just three simple steps. Step one, understand your audience or tailor your message to their roles, their values, and their decision-making constraints. Policymakers, advocates, and practitioners each interpret information differently, so one-size-fits-all communication rarely works. Step 2, identify windows of opportunity. Timing is crucial. Evidence influences policy most effectively when it aligns with political or social moments of receptivity, such as crises, elections, or shifts in public opinion. Step 3, engage with real-world policy making. Policy processes are rarely linear or rational. Analysts must engage in iterative networked policymaking environments by building relationships, anticipating trade-offs, and staying responsive to change. This three-step strategy underscores that communication is not a final step. It's a dynamic, ongoing part of the policy process itself. So let's take a look at these in more detail. A core principle of understanding your audience is minimizing their cognitive load. Policymakers operate under time pressure, competing priorities, and usually have an overload of information. So, to influence effectively, we must reduce friction in how information is processed. So, avoid needlessly complex data, displays, or technical language that require repeated reading. Use clear narrative elements, both words and in images, to make evidence more intuitive. Repetition helps reinforce key messages, but it must be coherent and purposeful. Remember that primacy and recency means that information at the beginning and at the end of a message is most likely to be retained. Finally, allow space for reflection and invite feedback. Policy communication should be a two-way adaptive process, not a one-directional data dump. Sophisticated communicators also tailor content to how policymakers actually use the data to make decisions. So first, align your policy goals with the motivations and constraints of policy makers and decision makers. This is not just about manipulation, or it's not about manipulation at all, rather, it's about strategic alignment and relevance. Policymakers rely on heuristics to make decisions quickly, and good analysis anticipates and works within these mental shortcuts. Second, recognize the power of framing. Facts alone rarely drive decisions, but rather facts embedded in meaning do. Evidence should be situated within a lens that matches policymakers' values, priorities, and ideological frames. Simple narratives with identifiable actors, stakes, and outcomes strengthens comprehension and recall. However, simplicity must never come at the expense of accuracy or nuance. And then policy communication requires clarity about the intended audience and purpose. Identify who will use your analysis and how, whether this is legislative staff, executive agencies, advocacy groups, program administrators, or coalitions. Each group has different informational needs. Next, anticipate secondary use. Your findings may be repurposed for advocacy or political strategy, so structure messaging accordingly, ensuring consistency and protecting analytical integrity. Consider whether some content should be tailored for specific audiences or deliberately not emphasized if it risks misinterpretation. Finally, language matters. Words can mobilize or alienate. Precision, respect, and awareness of political context preserve credibility. Kingdom's multiple streams framework remains one of the most influential theories for understanding policy change. Policy action becomes possible when three streams align: heightened attention to the problem, a viable and credible solution, and political will and opportunity. Policy framing alone is insufficient. Evidence must be translated into an acceptable solution, and the timing must be right. Effective analysis monitor the streams continuously, recognizing that opportunities often brief um, and an opportunity is often brief and dynamic. The goal is to be prepared um, when the policy environment shifts. Next, policy engagement requires more than producing analysis. It requires political literacy and relationship building. First, understand the rules of the game. These include formal processes that matter, but informal norms, networks, and trust often matter more. Second, coalitions amplify influence. Policy outcomes emerge from aligned actors who advance shared priorities. Analysts who build coalitions expand their research and their reach. Third, frame evidence in ways that resonate with policymakers' values, constraints, and priorities without compromising rigor. Ultimately, persuasion in policy is relational, contextual, and cumulative. Of course, in-person briefings are usually the best. However, these demand clarity, focus, and responsiveness. So, in order to do that, avoid jargon or technical language because it creates distance and cognitive burden. Instead, use large, clean graphics for larger audiences and distribute concise handouts for small briefings. Expect questions and critique. Effective analysts anticipate points of resistance and prepare evidence-based responses. Always leave behind a brief, polished summary of key findings and recommendations. Policymakers will reference it after you've left the room. Even strong analyses can fail in communication. Some key pitfalls include over-displaying process. Policymakers need conclusions and evidence, not every analytical step. This is not an academic exercise. Listing without depth. Alternatives require explanation and justification. Delaying conclusions. Policy audiences require clarity upfront. Do not bury the lead. And then style inflation. Avoid extremes because overly academic writing loses accessibility and overly casual writing reduces credibility. Next, forgetting the human element. Data do not persuade, analysts persuade. And then authority, clarity, and presence in this aspect matter. So thank you for your engagement throughout the semester, And remember that effective policy analysis requires rigorous methods, ethical integrity, and strategic communication. Your ability to translate evidence for decision makers will determine your impact as future public health leaders. On the next section, we'll explore policy implementation and evaluation further, and I look forward to seeing you next week.